Drew Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft. On the show, we talk to leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry. Today, we have a very special guest on the show, Paul Weaver. He's the head of cannabis for the Boston Beer Company. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Drew, thanks for having me. I just found out that I'm your first cannabis guest, and I'm just so flattered and honored to break the ice there. So thanks for stopping the stigma and bringing in a little bit of a weed talk.
Oh, I've been excited to have one on the show for some time. I'm very excited about this, and we're based out of California. And I have to say, I partake in a lot of cannabis beverages, and it's a really growing category. So, talk to me about Boston Beer Company and how they decided to move into this category.
Well, I think Boston Beer Company to your listeners is hopefully needs no introduction, but I'll do the preamble anyway. We're the brewers of Sam Adams and Twisted Tea, Angry Orchard, cider, Truly Hard Seltzer, real hit makers in the beverage alcohol space. And as cannabis becomes more and more welcomed into American lives, we're mindful of that macro consumer trend that there's this new comparable alternative to alcohol that's continuing to present itself and becoming more and more destigmatized. And at the same time, COVID and just general life has caused a lot of drinkers to kind of rethink their relationship with alcohol. So it's this interesting convergence of two macro trends of, consumer and drinkers' relationship with alcohol evolving at the same time as their access to and acceptance of cannabis continues to grow. So it's really us continuing to be striving to be the most innovative beverage company we can be and capitalizing on two macro consumer trends.
Yeah, I think in that ready to drink category, it's inescapable, especially in those states and provinces in Canada where recreational cannabis is legal. Like I go into the places here in San Diego, and suddenly there's coolers filled up. Yeah. I mean, it seems like every major brand is breaking into the category. Just seems unavoidable and actually just a great evolution.
Well, you live in California, Drew. One of the things that plagues these legacy or kind of more tenured legal cannabis markets is commoditization. There's just so much. It's called weed for a reason. It grows so easily, and you can easily find yourself with a glut of product, and the pricing per gram or per package of whole flower or traditional cannabis tends to drop like a commodity. It's like a cash crop. And what more mature cannabis companies are realizing is there's a lot of value to be engineered here by taking this, agricultural product and turning it into a high value consumer good, like a beverage or a gummy. And beverages are the most conspicuous form of cannabis consumption. They're a label out, it's a logo that's facing. It takes a few minutes or 10, 20 minutes to consume as opposed to a couple bites of a gummy. And so there's a lot of branding opportunities as well that are really exciting. So it's exciting to the cannabis industry because it's the antithesis of commoditization, which is continuing to plague all cannabis markets. And it's a highly brandable, conspicuous consumption experience, which for beverage companies like us is right in our wheelhouse.
Oh yeah. Now I'm just going to jump straight to the question I really want to ask, because one of the beefs that I have with all the beverages that I see in the coolers is the potencies all over the place. Yeah. And to the average, to the casual consumer or to the novice, you get one can that has 10 milligrams, one can that has 5, and that doesn't equate to anything. And I see a lot of people that they may want to have 2 to 3, which would not be recommended. Talk to me about how do you guys come up with the potency of your can?
Well, so Boston Beer, when we were entering the cannabis space, beer is our middle name. And what do we mean by that? Well, even though we sell hard teas and ciders and seltzers, beer is a drink of moderation. Beer is a drink of sociability. It's about sharing those experiences with your friends and your family. And that's how we wanted to approach cannabis. So what is the right potency of a product? What's the right flavor of a product? So first, it was about creating the right kind of brand story. So we created our own cannabis brand. It's called TeaPot. And TeaPot is a line of cannabis-infused iced teas. Great tasting. They don't taste like cannabis. They don't smell like cannabis. So they're very welcoming. They're very inclusive products. But then what's the right potency for TeaPot to ensure that we're finding a sweet spot of experienced cannabis consumers who want to augment their cannabis consumption and new cannabis consumers who don't want to get their have a bad experience or have one and done.
Mm-hmm.
So long answer to this question, Drew, is TeaPot is 5 milligrams of THC, which is a modest amount. It's about half a gummy. It's the simplest way to kind of describe it.
Yep.
So that, a new consumer can have half a can or maybe a full can of TeaPot and feel in complete control of their experience. And if you're a more experienced consumer, you can have 2, 3 and feel again like you're in control of your experience. The key with our approach to potency and the THC level of our cannabis products is to mitigate the risk of accidental overconsumption. There's nothing worse than accidentally taking too much cannabis. And that's why we set a very easy to understand 5 milligrams of THC. It's easy. The math is even easy, 5, 10, 15, et cetera. So a long-winded answer to your question, which the answer is 5 milligrams of THC, but the journey that got there is both kind of about the brand and how we introduce a brand and understanding who's drinking it and how. And from a volume perspective or sales perspective, it's also good to sell 2 or 3 cans as opposed to just one. So,
sure. 5
milligrams of THC we found is the right sweet spot for our drinkers.
That's good. I think I'd prefer 2.5 milligrams because then it almost equates to like a beer. So you could have 2. The moderate consumer could do like 2 or 3, and eventually get up to where I want, about 7.5.
Drew, if we're having a real talk about like the execution of these types of products, you have to think about a dispensary vibe and selling a cannabis product into a dispensary. And 2.5 milligrams is ideal. That's kind of the light beer equivalent, edible. But you also have to be mindful of shelf space. There are fridges, but there's small fridges, and you have to be mindful of what will get listings. And 10 milligram THC products, 100 milligram THC products. Those are the strongest products out there. 5 is enough to get the necessary listings. It's enough to move the needle for an experienced cannabis audience. But not too much where it's too intimidating. So I agree that kind of 2.5, that's a real perfect zone for a sessionable light beer equivalent for cannabis. But we also have to be mindful of a dispensary environment that is more conducive to experienced consumers. So I would say that you're never making everyone happy with your potency conversations. These are debates that we'll continue to have long in the future.
Yeah, no, I do like seeing the whole category settling down. Like if you go back 5, 10 years with potencies, they were all across the board, and you can
potency, but also just like stability and the accuracy of that potency and how. And we've come a long way.
Yeah, talk to me about the process of making a cannabis beverage. There's got to be some unique challenges versus a gummy and a mint. Well,
our R&D team, I would like to say, is the best in the biz. I mean, we've got resources and back home that know how to make great tasting products, but our local Canadian R&D team consists of resources that have prior experience from Canopy Growth, like myself and Tilray and Anheuser-Busch, and people who have really cut their teeth in learning the hard way how to make a cannabis beverage. And there are really 2 areas I would say that we took the hard road to learn. The first is emulsification. So emulsification simply means, will it blend? You have a cannabis extract or THC extract, and that's really viscous oil. It's like molasses. And if you ever look at like a vape pen and you tilt it to the side and you look at slowly, it oozes from one side to the other. That's the active ingredient. That's the pure extract. And that's not liquid, that's oil. So how do you get an oil product to emulsify? And there's some great partners and technologies that continue to evolve in terms of how to take a viscous, thick cannabis extract into a liquid ingredient that blends into a drink. And then will it be stable in the package? There was a lot of fear early on about THC degradation. The product, okay, we figured out how to make it blend, but will it be stable? Will it stay potent over time? Some of those early drinks you probably remember, Drew, when California first launched drinks, 5, 10 years ago, there was no guarantee that the potency of that product that was labeled was the same now as it was when it was packaged. Not from any sense of shenanigans, but just a lack of maturity in the science. So we've learned a lot about both how to make a liquefied cannabis ingredient and then how to keep that ingredient stable in the package for a decent amount of shelf life.
Well, now as far as like the stability, are there certain ingredients that compete with the THC that would cause that degradation to occur more rapidly, like an acid or a...
Yeah. I mean, it's different recipe by recipe. Some of it has to do with the liners of an aluminum can
Oh, wow.
that are there to protect flavor. It could actually be leaching THC molecules, light, air. These are all things that you've got to be mindful of. That aluminum can with the right liner is the perfect vessel for preserving a cannabis beverage for both potency and flavor. A lot of your guests will talk maybe flavor sensory stability. Will it taste the same 6 months from now as it does now? We always, of course, care about, will it taste the same in 6 months? But we don't really have to worry about alcohol degrading. It's usually, the alcohol is not the problem. It's usually the flavor. We've got two challenges, both the taste stability and the potency. But like I said, we've come a long way in the last, I'd say 5 years, and we feel really confident about our science in that space.
Oh, that's amazing. So what is the shelf life right now for a ready to drink cannabis product or a TeaPot?
Good question. Again, we're learning. There's no way to kind of know for sure without actual time. Like you can force age a product to get a sense of how it will age, but that's hypothetical. We've only been making TeaPot for a little over a year. So we've been monitoring it for about a year just to see how it's holding up. And so far, so good. Our mango green tea, we just did a 1-year stability test and it's holding up pretty good. So I would say right now, we like saying a 1-year shelf life for TeaPot. But the only honest way to do that work is to just make it, put it on a shelf and taste it every 30 days and see how it's doing. So, but we like what we're seeing, both potency, of course, and taste.
Yeah. Give us an idea of the lineup. So what's your current lineup in TeaPot with the flavors?
Well, the fun thing about TeaPot is it's designed to be accessible and easy to understand and kind of demystify the intimidation of marijuana. So, it's tea and pot. That's the simplest way. That's what TeaPot's all about, right? So the thesis behind TeaPot is we pair the right tea with the right pot for the right occasion. So we've got good day iced teas that are caffeinated, that we are infused with an uppity sativa strain. And then we've got good evening iced teas that are non-caffeinated, that we chose a more relaxing indica strain. So we've got 2 good day iced teas. We've got a lemon black tea and a mango green tea. Those are both under 100 calories, both 5 milligrams of THC and a modest amount of caffeine from the tea. And those are infused with a strain called Pedro's Sweet Sativa, which is a very popular cultivar of cannabis sold here in Canada. And then we have our first of 2 good evening iced teas that's out now, a blueberry chamomile. There's no caffeine in that chamomile. We infuse that with a strain called Black Sugar Rose, which is a trendy indica strain here in Canada, and lower sugar, lower caffeine, or no caffeine, and lower calories. So more meant to kind of replace your glass of wine at night. So that's kind of the idea. We experienced cannabis consumers know there's like a right pot for the right occasion. We're trying to communicate that knowledge through tea. And we've got 3 styles of TeaPot right now, but we've got an endless amount of teas in our arsenal. So there's no shortage of teas and no shortage of pot.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah. Now, most of the ones that we have locally here, it's either a
seltzer,
it's a seltzer, or it's a more of a juicier flavor, or it's a hoppier thing that's supposed to, for people that don't want to drink alcohol, that want to still feel like they're having a beer.
Well, you talk taste, like THC is a lot more of a neutral ingredient to work with than alcohol. So if you want to make a flavored alcoholic seltzer, you still have to add a little bit of flavor to mask the taste of it. But THC does have a much lighter flavor profile, but it still does have a taste. And tea tannins and the flavor of tea naturally complements cannabis, and so do hops, because we're in the same family. So tea already would kind of embrace the natural existing flavor of the cannabis, and it makes it where you don't necessarily have to mask something so much as just lightly complement and to kind of zhuzh it towards what you're going for. So tea is a great flavor to work with in cannabis. And just like twisted tea, the R&D hurdle of making a great tasting, completely non-carbonated still beverage is quite challenging, and something that Boston Beer does better than anybody. So all TeaPots are completely non-carbonated as well. So it's that kind of non-carbonated approach plus the natural flavor complement of tea to cannabis that makes the product so special.
No, I can see that affinity between it right now, just with the flavor profiles. Now, I need education here. You mentioned how you have to extract the cannabis and then emulsify it. Is it possible to actually steep cannabis and extract the THC, like have a tea bag? Yeah,
but not to any level of efficiency or guaranteed accuracy. So I remember back in prior to legalization, you'd find these tea bags, Mary's Medicinals, I think they were called. These tea bags of just probably just ground up weed in a tea bag and just steep it. And I bet there was, a modest amount of active ingredient that would somehow come out of that tea bag and into the liquid, but not with any level of scaled efficiency. We're talking like really efficient chemical extraction technology, like CO2 extraction, or in some cases, hydrocarbon extraction, where you're really able to get just the straight THC out of the product. And I'll be honest, like TeaPot just tastes like iced tea. It does not taste like cannabis. There's maybe a vague hint of THC if you're searching for it. And that taste profile that we're going for really could only be achieved through a very clean and efficient method of extraction. So perhaps you could find a really artisanal way of steeping and extracting that way, but I'm not sure it would be scalable from a beverage manufacturing perspective. And I bet it would leave a lot of residual taste, which might be off-putting to our drinkers. But there certainly are cannabis tea bags that exist, and those products are still out there.
And that makes sense because you're in the ready to drink category. You're not in the
even those tea bags that you can buy, Drew, like I bet most of those are kind of spiked teas as opposed to like just raw cannabis. They still would kind of take an extract and then maybe spray dry that and powder that on top of the tea just to ensure that you got high from it. Because if you just took ground weed and steeped it in water, I bet you would feel at best a slight buzz, and I'm not sure that would lead to a repeat purchase.
Yeah, you got to really then you're really just doing it for the tea.
Well, I mean, aromatics. I mean, I'm sure there's some value there, but it's not an efficient and repeatable experience.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about distribution. So you're in Canada. I mean, is TeaPot available in the United States or specifically in Canada right now?
Just in Canada. Boston Beer Company, aside from being just incredibly patient, it took us, we've been selling Twisted Tea, for example, for 20 years. Only now is it in the top 10 of beers in America. So we're a patient organization, slowly building this brand, learning in Canada how to sell it correctly and what really drives our drinkers' affection. But we're also a publicly traded company and are held to a different level of standards as far as how we might enter the U.S. market. So we don't play in the American cannabis market just yet, although we're really optimistic about some of the recent progress in American cannabis policy. But right now, the conditions don't allow us to sell in America. So we sell in Canada only.
Yeah. And now how do you market within Canada? Like is it just through the dispensaries or?
The shorthand, I would say this is, because I'm being your first cannabis guest, I feel like I'm kind of obliged to give you the primer on
our listeners need it and I need it too.
Okay. So here's how I shorthand what it means to, I've worked in beverage alcohol for a long time, but the shorthand I would say is that cannabis is kind of manufactured like pharma, distributed like alcohol, but marketed like tobacco. So what I mean by, let me break that into those three buckets. On the manufacturing side, my manufacturing process is a lot more fastidious, a lot more oversight, a lot more quality control checks, independent lab analysis, and just the paperwork required to make a product in the cannabis sector is quite laborious. But surprise, surprise, the same parties that distribute beverage alcohol are the ones that have raised their hands in Canada to distribute cannabis. And they're typically the government that gets their hands involved in terms of warehousing and moving product back and forth, granting licenses, etc. And then the marketing, though, is kind of a post-tobacco era where all of our marketing activity is heavily age gated. So if I can guarantee that you, Drew, are over the age of, in Canada, 19, then my marketing capabilities are decent. I can talk about my product, show branding. I can't make any claims, but I can still do kind of traditional digital marketing. But I can't do any out of home. I can't do any billboards. I can't do any TV. And I'm beholden to individual corporate policies. Like I can't advertise on Facebook. I can't advertise through Google or YouTube. And a lot of that is slowly changing, but that's the shorthand, right? It's like made like pharma, shipped like beer, and marketed like tobacco. So if you're in the dispensary, you're in that age-gated room. Lots of trade tools, lots of fun signs, lots of ways that I can engage with you, do non-infused sampling, etc. But outside the dispensary, you would have no idea that we exist. unless we do our job, which is like word of mouth, grassroots, really try and get our drinkers to be effusive and evangelical about their love of TeaPot, which they are. Our drinkers love TeaPot, so we try and make them happy.
Yeah, I love that comparison, pharma to alcohol distributed. And that makes so sense. And it actually kind of encapsulates, as cannabis is moving from like that fringe counterculture to a mainstream kind of marketing, you're kind of going through each one of those steps. And I know in California also, here, we are seeing a little more active, marketing, like
it's almost kind of what's interesting is you end up getting like actual regulations, like laws that are either by a state or by a government that say, you can and can't do this. And then you have individual advertising companies that are choosing whether or not they want to open up their business to the weed biz. So like a billboard provider in California, those are, a handful of people that own those billboards. Which ones are cool selling those billboards to cannabis companies? And in Canada, that's not permitted by law, but maybe in the state of California, it would be.
We got billboards everywhere now.
The biggest hurdle we have right now, though, honestly, is in the digital marketing space. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. These are platforms that that's how most CPG companies spend their ad dollars, and are blocked out, and not from any sort of federal policy, but from individual corporate policies from Meta and Alphabet, those two companies that run those platforms. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some policy shift in Washington, if that reverbs into Silicon Valley, and all of a sudden now your Instagram is inundated with pre-rolls and gummies.
I wouldn't be surprised either. Now let's go way back to before you're the head of cannabis. How did you get your start in the industry, and how did it evolve into where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, just like everybody, I'm sure you, we've all had an interesting journey in beverages and in cannabis. So I started in the beer business when I moved to Toronto in 2011. I was working for the Molson Brewery here in Toronto, appointed over there. The Molson Brewery in Toronto, 11 years, 12 years ago, doing product development work and helping launch products in Canada, really learning the beer business. And then in 2017, it was pretty clear that Canada was going to be legalizing cannabis at the federal level. There was a lot of momentum. All the stars were aligned in politics. And I had started to really develop a passion for medical cannabis. It had become quite therapeutic for me. I grew up in Arizona, and so cannabis was quite verboten in Arizona. So for me, it was a wake-up call about the stigma that I'd grown up with. So I joined Canopy Growth Corporation, which at the time was the largest medical cannabis company in the world, and led their innovation department as they launched recreational cannabis in Canada. And I learned a lot about cultivation and growing weed and the different form factors. But most importantly, I learned for a passion for cannabis beverages. And then I met the team at Boston Beer a few years after that. And here we are.
It's a great story. Yeah. I just drove through Arizona. I was shocked to see all the,
now it's per capita, I think the highest weed state in America, surprise. So I don't think I'm the only Arizonan that's had this epiphany, but I'm a DARE graduate in 1994. So,
I never would have thought that. And I never would have thought Arizona was going to shift.
Well, I went to Arizona State, and Arizona State's a heavy drinking school. So it's not like they don't know how to party, but their cannabis relationship was pretty secretive. And now the secret's out.
Yeah, it's been a tremendous shift, especially from my standpoint back to, the early days. So for the early days with you, starting into the recreational in Canada, how is, how just paint the picture of how it's evolved. The perception's changed for sure, but the way you're marketing it and the way that, just
it's hard to say.
People's
it's hard
receptiveness.
To say, Drew, because in Canada, Canada's relationship with pot, I think, has always been a little bit more progressive and welcoming than American relationship with pot. So I mean, to say that it's kind of like a non-factor in the day-to-day lives of Canadians is probably the truth, right? We had lots of early fervor of enthusiasm in terms of all these new brands launching all these new products. And the industry continues to grow. We continue to break records in terms of sales and driving an industry that's quite sizable and drives a lot of tax revenue for provinces and the federal government. And of course, just like every new market, there's dispensaries at every corner that are littering the area. And then there's a kind of a culling of that and a right sizing of the dispensaries kind of per mile. So that evolution has occurred. But in terms of kind of the impact in day-to-day life and society, like you smell it a bit more in the parks, but generally speaking, like it's a non-issue. Now it's been really, it hasn't changed the culture at all. There isn't really a huge pushback towards legalization at the federal level here in Canada. And no, it's just kind of part of day-to-day life now. You wouldn't think twice if someone's leaves the party to go outside or smoke a joint, or brings a 6-pack of cannabis beverages to the holiday gathering. It's just kind of normal up here now.
And I've been surprised at evolution too. The way it's just become part of life, at least on the West Coast here. Like go back to 2012, 2013, when the medical cannabis was out. It was still a little bit of an under the table thing where you'd bring the weed to the party or you'd bring the edible. And now it's just kind of part of the conversation, and it's part of a mainstream conversation. And I think it's the users that have really helped educate all the non-users. Not that we were pushing it, but it just...
Well, I find myself having to kind of cool it because I'm such a preacher. I've got the good news of being pro cannabis. I kind of try and let it be kind of an organic conversation because, at its core, Drew, weed is awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's such a great product. It's so much fun. And it's surprising to a lot of people just how much they enjoy a cannabis experience and how much they want to learn more after they have their first cannabis experience. So I think, those of us that work in the industry and have worked there for a long time have a responsibility, frankly, to be responsible shepherds and sherpas of people for their first cannabis experience, which is why I love TeaPot so much. It's a great introductory product for the cannabis space. And maybe it's not for you, but it's an easy thing to sample, even if it's just for the taste and a fraction of a milligram. So, I think part of that cultural evolution sits on us as industry leaders to be the ones to introduce you to a cannabis product, be empathetic to a new person's experience and give them the right product, and don't accidentally make them hate weed.
Yeah, it's a much better vehicle because you can sip the tea. You can sip it over the course of this time. I think a lot of new users, they've got their gummy and they're used to eating like 10 gummy bears. You're not going to eat 10, but it seems weird to have this one little piece of candy that takes a second to chew and that's it. You got to wait.
Yeah, and it feels kind of sneaky too, we talked earlier about like a conspicuous form of consumption. Well, branding in flower is very difficult. Like seen in Pineapple Express when he's like, he smokes it. He's like, it's Pineapple Express. Like, no one knows that. Like, no one can smoke a joint and know what strain it is. And maybe it might be labeled on the filter tip, but even then you're holding the filter tip. A gummy is 2 bites and it's done, and you're washing it down and you're just hoping it doesn't taste bad. And even if it does, you don't really care that much. It's gone and the flavor's gone in a couple of minutes. But a beverage that's prolonged, its taste matters the most because you're drinking it slowly and savoring it and judging it. And the branding is conspicuous. So the logo says something about you and it's communicating something to everyone around you. So it's a easy entry point, but it's the one that you have to do right because you have to be mindful of just how prolonged that experience is.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about prolong the experience, what the biggest issue that with cannabis is it takes so long to actually be reactive. Someone takes the gummy, it's an hour and a half later. And like I've got a neighbor he's coming out with a line of tortillas.
Infused tortillas?
Infused tortillas.
Get out of here.
Little tacos. I'm like, you probably want to have 4 tacos. You can't have a 15 milligram tortilla.
I thought I'd heard it all, Drew, but infused, are they taco shells, hard shells? Soft
tacos.
Soft taco shells. Cool. Hey man, I'll give a shot, but like, I think that's kind of a novelty product, right? Like,
it's a novelty, but in San Diego, it makes sense. But someone's going to have 3 tacos. You got to be mindful that no one has a taco.
Yeah. And I'll crush 3 tacos in about 3 minutes too, right?
Yeah. So now I'm back to my 2.5 milligrams of time. So as far as efficacy or the absorption time, is there is work being done especially in the drink category, to have it hit more like a beer?
This is a topic that has been discussed ad nauseum for years because it's like, how do we equate it to beer? And I don't think anyone ever asks Sam Adams, well, how fast till I get a buzz from Sam Adams? It's one of these different, like just the conversation weed versus alcohol is just so different. But you're right, like that onset time, which is the kind of the verbiage that's often used, the onset, when you begin experiencing a cannabis high for an edible product, because it goes through digestion, what you ate and how it gets absorbed into your stomach lining and all that stuff. Like it's so variable, you know, maybe it's 30 minutes, maybe it's an hour. What's the curve? Like what's the peak? You know, I like to say the answer to the question, am I high, is always yes. Like if you have to ask, the answer is yes. The nice thing about a cannabis beverage, though, is the way that the science works in terms of liquid, the way it's absorbed into the body, the way liquid is absorbed, it does act faster. It's faster than an edible. So
I have noticed that.
A cannabis beverage just inherently has a faster onset than a traditional oil-based gummy, just because of the way that it enters your bloodstream. And you can start feeling a slight cannabis buzz 15 minutes or so. Maybe that's what a beer is. And there are people who continue to refine and dial that in and figure out ways of kind of increasing the onset time. But I think if you can get close to 15 minutes, that's enough. I don't hear too many people choosing one brand or another because this one's got a 10-minute onset versus this one has a 12-minute onset.
That's well within the realm. It's the 90-minute.
I think the key is you're trying to do is if you can feel a buzz within 20 minutes of having a single beverage, I think we're in the ballpark of beverage alcohol, and you're, again, doing all you can to reduce the risk of accidental overconsumption. That's kind of the goal here in terms of onset time. When you have something that takes an hour, that's when that risk of like, I'm going to have another. I'm going to have another. Next thing you know, you've taken 30 milligrams of THC and the swell that occurs 90 minutes later, and you maybe weren't prepared for that. So yes, drinks are faster onset than traditional.
Is it the emulsification that helps aid that delivery?
Yeah. I mean, it's the fact that it's liquid. It's a liquid and it goes into your body faster that way.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. So what advice would you have for sort of other beverage producers getting into this category? And it doesn't have to be country based, just in general, legalization and what aside, what are the things that they got to be mindful for? Like kind of do you separate the brand from the cannabis brand, like the beer brand from the wine brand from the cannabis brand? Or should they all have a synergy?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I think that's all personal, right? Like I think for Boston Beer, both legally, we were required to create a separate brand here in Canada, and kind of practically, like our Twisted Tea brand is doing so well, on such a great pace. It just confuses matters if we were to try and add a THC version of Twisted Tea into the pipeline. So the idea of just having a dedicated cannabis brand that has its own values, that has its own message, that has its own drinker piece conversation, that works for us. I'm not sure that works for everybody, but for us, that was the right decision. But I do think, and this is where we're fortunate. I'm blessed to have the resources of Boston Beer to make our drinks, because our drinks objectively taste incredible and are, I find, far better than both the drinks that I had a chance to be a part of making long before joining this company and a lot of the drinks I tasted. And I think there is a bit of an over-reliance on branding in the cannabis space generally, because it's quite easy to make a really cool logo these days and quite easy to make a really cool brand vibe. But taste is king, more so than cannabis drinks in any other form factor, because it is that prolonged consumption. So I think getting taste right and testing it through a prolonged consumption, not just a sip test, but do a swig test or do a session test, have a few of these and make sure that taste doesn't linger, that there's no building chemical taste. Just being mindful that like, this is the one factor where taste is going to make or break your brand for the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. The session test, because some of the things that taste good on the first sip, 3 sips in, you're just
well, session testing is very common in beverage alcohol, right? Like send a 6-pack home, how does it taste after 1, 2, 3, 4? And that's important. It's just as important in cannabis drinks as it is in any other drink, is how does that flavor build? How does it taste after the second one? Is that something you want to go back to? Or is your mouth cloying? Or has it got some weird bitter chemical taste? These are all the things that I think the best drinks have mastered.
Oh, okay. Very interesting. You mentioned something. So legally, Boston Beer couldn't put their name on it in Canada?
Well, in Canada, in California, right, you've got Lagunitas, Pabst, and
I'm a big fan of the Pabst one.
I actually quite like the Hi-Fi hops. That was one of the first cannabis drinks I think was onto something unique, the Lagunitas brand, because there are no laws in California that prohibit you from crossing
Okay.
In Canada, there is explicit laws that prohibit using an alcohol brand from extending into cannabis. So we can't do Angry Orchard cannabis cider. Maybe we could do Happy Orchard THC cider.
Okay.
But we can't do those direct brand parallels. So there is actually laws in Canada that prevent.
That's interesting. Yeah, I can see the thought process behind that. I think keeping the verticals separate, I guess.
But there's also just a request to really separate these universes of beverage alcohol and cannabis, and people like us participate in both, but we try and draw a fine line between the two.
Very interesting. Now, I'm going to put on your future cap. Where do you see this going over the next 10 years?
Weed or weed drinks or
the ready to drink cannabis drink category?
Well, I think that, first, I mean, it is a continually growing segment, right? Whether it's a cannabis consumer that should stop smoking and switch to a faster edible format that is better on the lungs, or a beverage alcohol consumer that maybe wants a different alternative to alcohol. We're right at the Venn diagram of two continually growing trends. So you're going to see the category continue to grow. Now, I think there's two roads in which this category continue to play out. One is in the traditional dispensaries, like you see in California. And the other is this really nuanced, nebulous world of liquor stores and what's happening in kind of these hemp states like Minnesota, Texas, and places where you're seeing hemp-derived cannabis beverages being sold just within liquor stores. And those are really disrupting the status quo in terms of the shopper. So I think continuing to see upward growth, we're going to see a fork in the road in terms of which markets it's being sold in. Is it going to be sold in the dispensary, in which case, we're competing against cannabis consumers and we're trying to drive the cannabis conversation towards beverages, or a traditional liquor store or a place where you buy liquor, where we're trying to introduce a new alternative to alcohol in a very familiar way. So two roads in front of us, and I think there's growth in both.
Oh yeah. No, you bring up a very good point about smokers that need to smoke a lot less and drinkers that probably need
There's a Venn diagram that we're
lay off that alcohol a bit. And I've seen that here just with my friends who are doing each. Now, you bring up hemp. Talk to my listeners, like the Texas hemp drinks or the Minnesota hemp drinks. How do they hit versus the THC based? I mean, they can't get you where you want to be, can they?
Well, they'll get you where you want to be, Drew. So I think that now the method of sourcing that THC from a hemp plant, there's a lot of ways that it can occur. And in absence of federal farming regulations and product development regulations, there is some risk in terms of where they're getting that cannabis from, right? Is there weird chemicals, pesticides, or residual solvents and stuff that are used to create this chemical? But at the end of the day, it is the identical chemical is what's being sold in TeaPot here in Canada, which is Delta 9 THC. Delta 9 THC is the standard chemical in all cannabis edibles and flower. It's the active ingredient. So if it says 5 milligrams of Delta 9 THC, that's the exact same as 5 milligrams of TeaPot up here in Canada. The sourcing and methodology in which they got to that chemical has to be questioned. You always got to be mindful that these are like semi-legal products with semi-regulated processes. So there is like the onus on the ethics of who's making it, and they're already kind of acting outside the bounds. So I do think there's, concern about the sourcing of the product and the safety of the product. But the end result, the end chemical of these hemp-derived THC Delta 9 products is the exact same.
I had no idea. I have learned something new today. I always saw hemp in my
I think it's a very clever wording, right? So saying something is hemp versus marijuana puts you in a different mindset in terms of where it's coming from. But this is all the same cannabis plant family with different cousins. The active cannabinoid chemical is all that really matters. So
that's very interesting. So Paul, as we're kind of wrapping down, what else can we talk about? What's top of mind for you today?
Well, I think that if your listeners are passionate about entering the cannabis beverage space, I think that it starts with advocacy, and it starts with ensuring these products are unequivocally legal at the federal level. And that means, participating in the reform movement, find out who's leading reform in your home state, join those groups, join meetings. That's the easiest way to kind of ensure you're doing it for the right reasons for the long term, is understanding kind of what the grassroots reform movements are looking like in your state. And if you're in an existing state that's already legalized, how do we prepare for the future, protecting your future business against, interstate commerce or future federal reforms? You're not kind of beholden to just one state industry. One of the things I'm very proud of that Boston Beer has set up with our cannabis division is we really emphasize brand and liquid, not infrastructure. We've got partners that facilitate it. We have a lot of co-manufacturing relationships, but we don't own any manufacturing, or we're not invested in one manufacturing methodology. We have a liquid and we've got a brand, and we're trying to be as flexible as possible because the roads in front of us are quite unclear. So, making sure you own your recipe and own your brand, and try and be as flexible on the underlying infrastructure as you can be, because the next 10 years of cannabis manufacturing processes are going to be a mess. So just be prepared to kind of weather that storm.
I can only imagine the growth of the next 10 years. That is some great advice, Paul. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find out more about you and TeaPot?
Well, our handles are Drink TeaPot. So just go to www.drinkteapot or see us on Instagram at Drink TeaPot. We've got some great merchandise for sale. They go to a great charity up here called Pardons Canada. So you can check that out, which helps go towards pardoning people for cannabis convictions. But yeah, drinkteapot.com or at Drink TeaPot and learn more about our drinks. And there's also a product finder. So if you or any of your listeners find themselves north of the border, you can find it in the store and try it for yourself. And it tastes pretty good and the effects are pretty good. So I think you'd enjoy it.
I got to search it out. I'm heading up to Tofino in a few months.
Oh yeah. We're great in BC. We're great presence in British Columbia. So check it out.
All right. I will be checking out. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Joe.
You have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.